Hey, Darden, welcome back to Taking God at His Word, Home Edition, as we are in episode 10. And what we're going to do this week is, as you guys know, kind of our tagline, kind of our thing that we try to do with this video podcast series is just to help empower you to be able to disciple the people you love. And the way that we want to do that, we're going to mix it up a little bit. I know we've been kind of walking through and talking about John. Last week in episode 9, we kind of set up the names of God. And this week, you heard the first message, Elohim, as Andrew preached about God the Creator, right? And so we're gonna dig into that a little bit more. We're gonna maybe go off a little bit on a little excursion here, and we're gonna really dig into this idea that God is our Creator. And the route that I want to go with this is this. Listen, we know as God's creatures, we have been made in His image. So the thing I want to talk about, and we see this in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 27, where it says that let us make man in our own image, and male and female He made them. And so we know God has created us and designed us not only to resemble Him, but to also to be in relationship, and also to demonstrate and mirror His character throughout the four corners of creation. That was our job. That was our original job description given to us as His creatures. And we know the story that eventually sin comes into play in Genesis chapter 3. We know that Adam and Eve choose to rebel and try to establish themselves as their own God. And we know that it ushers in the curse of sin, and it ushers in chaos and decay and disease again as sin starts to ravage everything in our life. But what I really want to focus on with this idea of God being the creator and us being created in His image is how do we view other people in our lives? Do we see people, especially, and here's the challenge, do we see people, even people we don't agree with, do we see them as people who bear the image of God, as people who have immense worth and value based upon the fact that they have been made and molded into God's image? And that's the question before us today. And see, I think that's the challenge. As we heard Andrew's sermon this past week, maybe the challenge for us this week is how do we take this idea that we're created in the image of God, and how do we apply it to how we treat, speak, and how we care for those who are placed in our lives? Maybe right now you've got, maybe you have got a son or daughter who's wayward, and it's hard to love them right now because of how they treat you or speak to you. How can you honor them this week by showing them that they're an image bearer of God? Or maybe you work with a coworker, right? Like we all can wrestle with coworkers, right? What happens maybe if that coworker you're really struggling with, how do you see them as made and molded in the shape of God and give them the honor and dignity they deserve, even when they may be frustrating you, or even when maybe they've offended or hurt you? How do we see people as image bearers of God? Because I think what's interesting here is when we start to do that, when we start to see people for who they're made in the image of God, then what ends up starts happening is we start to be able to demonstrate more compassion, grace, and mercy, because we know too that we're created in the image of God. We also know too that we are affected by the consequences of sin, and we know we have this own sin and brokenness and selfishness in our own life. So we need to ask the question, how do we show people and honor them in our lives, especially the ones that are more difficult to love? I see that's the challenge before us today. And so like one of the ways that I think about doing this is, especially maybe if I have this with a family member or maybe with someone I'm struggling with at work, is how can I go out of my way to do something for this person to show them that I respect them and care for them? Because when you do these things for them, what ends up happening is not only does it demonstrate that you see them as an image bearer of God, but what it does is it does work on your own heart. It helps you to begin to start seeing people not just for the things that they do, but for who they are. Because we're more than what we do. We are who we are. In fact, I like to think of this way. A theologian that I read a lot, his name's Francis Schaeffer. He's passed on. He used to say this about human beings. He used to say like we're like glorious ruins, right? Now, you might have seen glorious ruins before, like an old Roman statue or the arches or whatever in Rome. We know at one point in time it was this glorious creation that was good and full and whole. But then we know over time it deteriorated. Now, that's the same way for us human beings. See, we were originally created good by our God, but because when sin entered into the world, right, we know that our goodness was tarnished and lost. And so what ended up happening is we see in people, especially even in their brokenness, even people that maybe we don't see eye to eye with, what we see is we see that they're made in the image of God, right? They still have an aspect of what God's done them, even though they may be tainted by sin. And we're the same way too. And when you start to view people as glorious ruins that, wrestle with sin just like you do, but also see the goodness that they were originally created with, what that starts to do is that starts to help you treat people with more dignity, more respect, and it starts to help you show a love and compassion that the world desperately needs right now, because we are in a world where we just want to put people into categories where we just hate them. They're in this category, or they believe this or this, and we don't take the time to realize that people are made in the image of God, and because of that, they have immense worth and value. So my challenge to you all this week, as you contemplate and think about the sermon and you contemplate and think about this message, is how are you going to go out this week, especially with someone that's difficult to love, and how are you going to empower them and disciple them by showing them how much you respect them and honor them as an image bearer of God? God bless.